What's going on, everyone? Mario here with Nickel Prints. Today we're going back to school and taking it back to the basics. On today's agenda we have Silhouette Cameo 101. In today's video we're going to learn the basics and how to get started cutting using a Silhouette Cameo. Whether it be heat transfer vinyl, adhesive vinyl, or whatever else you're using. This video is pretty much for total noobs, but if you are an experienced user, still check it out. Make sure you watch all the way to the end because there could be a few things that you learned that you didn't know. Remember that we're always learning and figuring things out, so just make sure you watch till the end. Now, it doesn't matter if you have the basic Cameo, the Pro, or the Plus. These settings are all universal. We're going to get up and running with our Silhouette Cameo, and we're going to make our first cut using adhesive vinyl. So you just took the cutter out of the box, and you don't know what to do. Setup is super easy. You have here your power cable port, your USB port, and your power button. If you want to see how to do that, I'm going to go ahead and link down below my Cameo Pro unboxing. In that video, you'll see just how to plug it in. It's really simple. Now, one thing to note is that in this video, I will be using a Cameo Pro. But if you have a Cameo Plus or a regular Cameo, don't worry about it because these settings are all universal. The only real difference between all the cutters is the size at which you can cut, going from 12 inches to 15 inches to 20 inches. So now that you have your cutter plugged in, let's go ahead and jump to the computer and figure out the software. Now that we're back at the computer, we're going to go ahead and look for the Silhouette Cameo software. Don't know the website, so we're just going to go ahead and Google Silhouette Cameo, and we're going to go to, here it is, Silhouette America. Once we're here, it's fairly straightforward. Let's go on over to software, get software. And we're going to download our software. Now, while that's downloading, I want to note one thing, and this is something that I think is very important that everyone should know. Let's go on over to the upgrade/buy section. And once we're here, we're going to see the different software packages. The one you're getting straight off the website for free is the basic edition. This covers the basic functions of the software. It can get you started with cutting and everything you need. Now, personally, I use the designer edition. The biggest reason is because I import my SVG files. If you use software like Adobe Illustrator or Inkscape to do your SVG files, to create SVG files or to create your designs, using the free basic software, you can't drag and drop those files directly. What you would have to do is convert it to a PNG, drag and drop, and then trace it, which we're going to cover in a little bit, or find a service that converts the SVG files to the Silhouette Studio files. Now, it is a $50 upgrade, but if you search on Google, there's going to be a few websites where you can get a couple discounts. So now we have the cutter set up and the software installed. We are ready to start cutting. Now, before we do that, what are a few different things that we can use this cutter for? To start off, we have the usual t-shirts and decals. That's pretty much what these cutters are pretty much universally known for. But aside from that, there's a whole world of different things that you can do. You can change the blade and cut fabric or leather. You can also change the blade out and replace it with a special silhouette pen. You can do glass etching, which I've actually done a bunch of times and I absolutely love the outcome of it. Now, the way I do it, I don't directly etch on the glass using the blade. I actually use vinyl for it, and I have an entire process that I do, which I will be covering in a future video. So if you want to learn that, make sure to subscribe. And that's just scratching the surface. There's so many more things that you can do with this cutter that it's just too much to name in one video. But for today, we're going to be cutting basic adhesive vinyl. This is what you put on cars, windows, doors, notebooks, your grandma's forehead, and pretty much anywhere else you want. These are permanent, for the most part. They also have removable vinyl that you can use for things like stencils. But for this video, we're going to be using this adhesive vinyl to cut a couple decals to just go ahead and stick on this DTG machine. So let's jump back to the computer and let's get started. Before we do that though, let's go ahead and load our vinyl. So on the vinyl, you have two different sides. You have the vinyl itself and you have the paper backing. The side you're going to cut on when it comes to adhesive vinyl is always going to be on the vinyl itself. So since you're going to be cutting directly on the vinyl, there is going to be no need to mirror it. So let's go ahead and load it face up. So the first thing you're going to do is just put your vinyl on the roller. Then you're going to feed it through the bottom here. I like to hold on to it, keep it flat, and then you're going to hit the feed button, which is the arrow pointing up. That's all there is to it. A lot of times the vinyl could be bent, so I like to push it in a little bit to make sure it just clears this little flap over here and goes in. So once your software is installed, go ahead and open it and you're going to be prompted with this screen. Now this is your work area for anything you're going to cut. This sheet right here represents your vinyl. Over here on the side, you're going to see the different machines. It'll automatically pick up the one that you're using, whichever is connected by USB. Here you have the option to use a cutting mat. Always make sure that if you're not using a cutting mat, you have it set to none. If you are using a cutting mat, always make sure to have the appropriate size selected. If you're using one or if you're not using one and you select the opposite, then it's going to cause the machine to start cutting in a random spot, usually a little bit higher or a little bit lower, and it just throws off the entire cut. So always make sure that the appropriate mat is selected or none. Now really quick, let's go ahead and select one of the mats, the Cameo Pro mat. This right here will be your media size, which is whatever you're cutting. As you can see, it adjusts to the mat selected, and this will vary based on the size of whatever media you're cutting. Now the media size. The media size is the size of your media, which is going to be your heat transfer vinyl, or whatever you have in there. And what we're using today is 12 inches in width. Height, I always do something long. I always leave it about 24 because It's a roll of vinyl, so I keep it at 24 just to avoid any issues. Right under the width and height, we have constrained media to cutting mat. This option, always make sure it's checked off. If you have it checked on, it can give you a few issues. Then you have the option to rotate your view, and then you have the show print and cut border. The print border shows how big you can print using a basic printer. Typically, I use this for when I'm using a cutting mat. I'll put the print border and then I'll set the width and height to an average paper, which is, let's say, 8.5 by 11. The print border just shows where you'd be able to print on the paper. That's not something that I typically ever bother with, so I just leave that unchecked. The cut border shows how close to the edge you can cut, and that will vary based on whether you're using a cutting mat or not. So if you see right now that we have the cutting mat selected, you have it fairly close to the edges over here. Now let's remove that cutting mat, and then you'll see that on the left it's scooted in a little bit, and so did the bottom. So the cut border I always have checked off because you always want to make sure that your design is within these borders. So the first thing I'm going to do is just write my name really quick. Let's go ahead and do Neko Print. I'm going to double click it, highlight it, and select a different font. I want something kind of basic, nothing too crazy. That one looks good. Alright, so let's do this. Let's make it a bit wider. Oh, wait a minute. So I forgot to adjust the width of the media. This is 12 inches, and this I'm just going to keep putting at 20 or 24 or whatever. Let's make this about 8 inches. I want to add an Instagram icon. So let's go to Google and let's search for Instagram PNG. Usually when you search up a PNG, it gives you a solid color image, which is what you're going to be wanting when you're cutting these designs. So this is going to be perfect because this is one solid image. Let's go ahead and right click it, save it. Now that I have that here, I'm going to go ahead and drag and drop. Now remember, this is a PNG image. I'm able to drag and drop it using the free software and the premium software. If this image was an SVG and I tried dragging and dropping, it wouldn't let me do it. It'll give me an error and tell me that I need to upgrade to be able to use that feature. But since it's a PNG, and you can also use a JPEG, it lets me drag and drop. Now usually with PNGs have a clear background, which the software will automatically pick up. As you can see, you have the little red lines on the side. That is where the machine's going to cut. That's why it shows as transparent here, and it shows as a cutting line. Now I'm going to drag and drop in a JPEG so you can see the difference. Now, as you can see, the JPEG has a white background. There's no transparencies in it. So when you decide to cut this, it's going to cut it as a big square. The way we can see how it'll cut is just move it into the middle, go to send, and then you'll see a preview. So as you can see, all the red lines are what's going to cut. Here you have the name, and then you have the Instagram icon as the PNG. Now the JPEG doesn't even have any cut lines, so it's not even going to cut. So what do we do in this case if we have a JPEG that we want to trace? Let's go on here to the side. We're going to look for the little butterfly looking icon. If you hover over it, it's going to say open the trace panel. Then you're going to get this window over here. Under trace, you're going to select trace area, and you're going to highlight it. Now everything in yellow is what's going to be traced and what you're going to end up cutting. If you have a few different colors in the image, you can mess around with the threshold. You can go ahead and raise it. As you can see, it picks up a few more details in the image. You can mess with all these settings to get a better trace on the image. And that's something that you'll end up learning as you use the software and familiarize yourself with it a little bit more. So then you have the trace style, which is regular trace, which will trace everything as it is, and the outer edge. And then you have trace and detach. So first off, let's trace. And then you get the basic trace. So it traces all the outlines of the image, and as you can see, it's pretty much the same as the PNG. Now let's trace the outer edge, and what that'll do, as the name states, just trace the outer edge. Now let's try trace and detach. And what this did is it traced the outline and it detached it somehow. I'm honestly not sure what that does. I've never used it, and I probably won't. So if you know exactly what that does, just go ahead and do me a favor, leave it down in the comments below. It'll help me and everybody else that's learning this. So let's get rid of both of these, and let's just leave the regular PNG. If you want, you can also trace a PNG, but a lot of times there's really no need to. Now I'm gonna go ahead and resize this to the size of my text. And there we have it, our first decal ready to cut. Let's make sure all our settings on the regular display are set the way they should be. So I'm going to go ahead and click back to the page setup panel. Just make sure that the right machine is set up. Now let's go on over to the send button. I forgot to mention about these two. This is a Silhouette store. I've never purchased anything from there. And then you have the library, which is everything you've downloaded from the Silhouette store. So now that we're at the send tab, currently my material is set to heat transfer smooth, and that's not what we're using. We're using adhesive vinyl. Typically adhesive vinyl is set under vinyl glossy. So let's click drop down and then look for vinyl. There's a bunch of other types of materials that you can choose from. They have the glitter, the glow in the dark, the matte. For this, I'm using the basic glossy, and because I've done this before and I know my cutter and its settings, I know I have to raise the blade by 1. This gives me the best results for my cutter. A lot of times you can use the default settings and you'll be perfectly fine. But after a little bit, if your blade starts to wear down, you want to just increase some of the settings, increase the blade, the force, and that'll help you out with some of your cuts. So while I was editing, I realized that I missed this part. That's why I'm using a few different images right now. So this speech bubble is a PNG, and this is regular text that I inputted using the Silhouette software. If you look up here, you have 4 different options. You have simple, line, fill, and layer. And then down here, you have no cut, cut, and cut edge. Always keep this under simple, and this is under cut. These 3 I've never used. I always keep it under simple. Now, when it comes to these 3 options down here, these you could find handy. You can't click on these if nothing is selected. So let's go ahead and select our text. And then you can choose whether to not cut it, or cut the edges. But these are my settings. Now we're pretty much ready to cut, so just go ahead and sand it. So now what we'll do is hit the down button and feed our design in through the back. Now because of space constraints, you won't be able to see me cutting it from the back. And there we have our first cut using a Silhouette Cameo. Cutting a vinyl decal is honestly one of the most basic things that you can do. It's one of the easiest things that you can do to start to get your feet wet and really learn the basics of the machine, how to use it, how to mess with the settings a little bit, and just familiarize yourself with it. Now, as mentioned earlier, there are a lot more things that you can do with the Cameo, but as you start to explore these other things that you can do with it, you're going to come to realize that you need a few more accessories. You want to get those t-shirts done, you're going to need a heat press. And a few more things that you'll just discover along the way. This is just the beginning of our Back to the Basics series. With the holidays coming up, I know a lot of people are going to be receiving cameos and stuff. Now, I will be covering a lot more things that you can do with the Cameo in future videos, so please make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of that. If you found this video helpful, please make sure to hit that like button. It truly helps small channels like mine. Thank you all so much for being here. I hope you found this video helpful, and catch you guys next time. Peace.